Okay, before I go on to our next notebook, I just wanted to clarify what I was confused about from the last notebook of why Randy, medical clearance, uh, the adoption match was false. And that's because while Randy is altered and has the right age, he doesn't have medical clearance yet. And same thing with Argus. All right, excuse me. So now let's get into using classes to model persons and patients. So we're going to start off by defining a class person. And if you recall in the very first classes we talked about programming is the art of abstraction. So here, the first thing we need to say is what do we want every person to have for our program? And so in this case, I'm going to settle on a first name, last name, middle name, sex, and age. Now, middle name may not be so common, but these are the attributes that I'm going to say for the purposes of my program, all persons will have. So again, we start by defining the constructor. The constructor is the function double underscore init double underscore. The constructor, as all class methods, has an initial attribute self that's going to refer to a specific instance of this class. And then I'm passing in a bunch of keyword arguments, first name, last name, middle name, sex, and age, that I'm going to use to assign variables to the attributes I'm going to create for this class. I'm going to do a little pre-processing first. I'm going to make sure that I'm always recording sex with uppercase, and if the person passes in the default value of first name none, and if the sex is female, then I'm going to set a default name of Jane. If it's male, well, if it's not female, which isn't necessarily explicitly male, the first name will be John. If I do pass in a specific first name, then first name gets set to the value that I passed in with the keyword argument first name. Similarly, with last name, if nothing is passed in, then we're going to set it equal to Doe. Otherwise, we're going to use the last name that's provided in the function call. Middle name and age, straightforward. Now I'm going to define some methods. This first one, get full name, will return a string that's first name, middle name, and last name. And then I'm going to define a method, get characteristic, that takes as a sole argument self, and it's going to return a string that describes this person. So it's going to return the first name, middle name, last name, sex, and age. You can see that I'm setting the first name equals and then the string and then a line break, etc. That all gets put into one string, and that string gets returned by the method. Okay, so that's our definition of a person. Now we're going to define an inherited class, which will be a type of a patient. Well, a patient is a person. So whereas when we defined person, we inherit from object, when we define patient, we inherit from person. Now, the person is going to have a constructor, a double underscore init. It's going to take, again, an argument self, and then I'm passing in these keyword arguments, and you see I have the same ones I have associated with a patient, but then also things that are specific to a patient. These are things for a person, and then these new attributes, these new keyword arguments that are associated with the patient. In this case, PCP for primary care physician, chief complaint, and the medical record number. Now we already defined all the code for assigning name and age, and so I don't want to replicate that. So I'm going to call the parent class, which is person's constructor. And I do that with a super call. Now the super takes as its first argument the name of the current class, patient, and the specific the self argument, and then I do this. So this is going to go climb up the inheritance class. So this is going to tell it, this is essentially referring to person, and we're going to say invoke the person attribute through this dot method, dot init function, and then we pass along the keyword arguments that are associated with a person. Now, we still need to use the current constructor to assign the PCP value, the chief complaint value, and the medical record value. Now, when I do a get characteristic, characteristics of a person of a patient include the characteristics of a person. So again, I'm going to use the super method. Again, and so super, I provide this patient self to reference up to the parent class, which is person, and then I'm going to use the dot get characteristics to invoke the get characteristics method of the person. And of course, if we come up here, that returns a string with first name, middle name, last name, age, sex, etc. That gets assigned to the variable text here in our patient get characteristics method. And then we are going to add to that the string descriptions of the PCP, chief complaint with a typo, and medical record number. Oops. All right, so now let's create some. So didn't explicitly say this, but the way we create an instance of a class is by calling a function that has the same name as the class, and this is going to invoke the constructor. And then I pass in whatever arguments I need or can provide for it. So let me split that cell. Let me put that in parentheses. And so when I print get characteristics of Brian as a person, I get my name, sex, and age. Now let's create an instance of a patient. So in this case, I'm providing my name. I'm not 25, but I'm not 46 either. So, and then the variables that are associated with the patient. And I'll print the characteristics of Brian patient, and I'll ask what type Brian is. So here you see we have our the characteristics that are associated with a person, and then I've added on the characteristics that are associated with a patient. And you see Brian is a type of person, whereas patient Brian is going to be a type of a patient. Okay, Python provides some functions for asking whether a particular object is a subclass, an inherited class of another type, or whether it's an instance of a particular class. So in this case, I'm asking, is a person a patient? And I do this with is subclass. Is person a subclass of patient? That's false. So patient is a subclass of person, not person a subclass of patient. Let's do the next one. Is patient a person? Yes, a patient is a person. Is Brian a person? So is a specific instance. So I can say, is Brian an instance of a person? It is. Brian is a person. I can ask, is patient Brian a person? Patient Brian is a person because a patient is a kind of a person. Is Brian a patient? Brian is not a patient. Brian is just a person. And then I can ask, is patient Brian an instance of patient? And yes, that's true. All right, so one other topic. So when we create these constructors, we are creating variables and attributes that are associated with a specific instance of the class. Well, we can also have class level variables, and I do that by defining attributes that sit inside the class but are not inside the constructor. So in this case, I'm creating a class 1, inherits from object, and I'm assigning a class level variable global1, and I'm setting it equal to 1. And then I'm going to create an attribute g in my constructor and set it equal to 0. So now, let's just split this up a little bit. I'm going to ask what the value of global1 is for class 1, and I see that it's 1. Now I created two instances of class 1, one a variable called C1, the other a variable called C2. Let me split this. Okay, now I'm going to ask what the value is of global1 associated with C1 and the value of global1 associated with C2, and they're both 1. Now I'm going to set the global1 for C2 equal to 3, and then ask what the value is of global1 associated with C1 and global1 associated with C2. And see that global1 is 1, and global1 for C2 is now 3. Now if we go in here and we set the class 1 global1 to 5, what are the values that we get here? So the global1 value associated with C2 is still 3. That's because we assigned this value here, and the attribute of the instance is hiding the value of the global variable, the class level variable, global1. But you see, when I look at C1, the value of C1 global1, because I haven't explicitly assigned a global1 to the instance C1, it's going to access the class level value of global1, which has a value 5. But the C2 is getting the value 3 because that's the instance level variable global1 is hiding access to the class level variable global1.